If I wanted to help myself, I should help somebody else. And with that sort of opening and that thought, I got asked by a friend of my brother's if I would meet with the guy on the Dallas Cowboys, which is my team, and his wife. I went and met with Derek and Emma, and Emma's brother had died in Afghanistan. He was a Marine, and they wanted to start a nonprofit, and they asked for my help. And I started helping them, and every 2 weeks, someone would call me and say, I heard you help veterans groups, can you help us? And I had no military experience, I had no understanding of that world. But the one thing I did understand was suffering and struggle and suicidality. And I believe deeply in order to sustainably help other people, right? I run a nonprofit, it's grown a lot. We have 85 people who work here, 86 people who work here. So it's a lot. There's a lot of responsibilities, a lot of obligations, a lot of challenges we get to deal with. And so I think one of the things that's really, really important is to take care of yourself. And so like for me, it's having a routine. And what that's about for me is I wake up, I meditate every day, I engage in gratitude, I work out and move my body. And from that point forward, after maybe the first 2 hours of the day, then the rest of that day is for everybody else. But if I don't do those things, if I'm sleep deprived, if I'm not moving, if I'm not meditating, then I don't have the patience and the calm and the energy that's required to bring all my talents and skills to bear. So I think about it like it's like a flame, right? And part of what helps the flame certainly is helping other people, but you can certainly burn out. And John Lewis, the amazing civil rights activist, congressman, he said, be a pilot light, not a firecracker.
Welcome back to an episode here on the Hart and Hustle podcast. Listen, I'm super excited because we started this conversation already on the right foot. You were talking about wrestling, so it got me excited. I ask you, Josh, before we even get started, people get to know who you are. What is that one thing that you like that no one knows that you like?
Wow, that's a heck of a question. Probably fiction books, because I think I get tagged with the idea that all I read is nonfiction, leadership, memoirs, and things like that. So I'm down for some good novels and fiction, and I was just reading a bunch of authors over the Christmas holidays. So I'll give you that.
Okay. Listen, we had to start off strong just because I enjoyed the question. You came in hot, and then I realized, like, how did he remember? But then as I look over my shoulders, I'm like, it's actually all over me here. Excited, Josh, to have you on this podcast. Let the people know, where's the organization you're representing? What is the title that you hold?
So I'm the CEO of a nonprofit called Boulder Crest Foundation.
Love it, man. And what gets you there, man? What was the why? Josh, I feel like when we get into these spaces, we always get there for reasons. What was your reason?
As I reflect on my life and look back, the fact that I'd be sitting here having this conversation with you, doing what I'm doing, is so improbable to me. I mean, I grew up as a kid in Dallas, with the task of getting a profession, making the family proud. I went to college and then ended up going to work at large companies. I worked for a big international company in London, then New Zealand, and then came back to Dallas where I grew up. And I got married, and I guess, by all accounts, I had the life. I had everything I was supposed to want. I had achieved success at a young age, and I was continuing to kind of climb the corporate ladder. And I had this epiphany prompted by my wife at the time, when she just said, is this how you want to spend the rest of your life? And I began to reflect on and examine everything. And I was like, holy cow, like, what have I done? I've built this entirely false existence. I'm like an actor in the movie of my life, like The Truman Show. And it is deeply, deeply unsatisfying. And went through a range of steps. Probably don't suggest that everybody changes everything all at once, but I'm a little bit impulsive at times. And so I got divorced, switched careers, changed friends, did a whole bunch of things all at the same time. And on the one hand, was liberated to go figure out who it was that I was supposed to be and what my life was supposed to be about. On the other hand, when you've constructed your identity and value and self-worth based on external things and you push all those away, you're going to be in crisis. And I was in crisis, and I struggled, and I couldn't sleep, and I had panic attacks, and I was drinking too much, and I just got to this place where I could not see a way out. And I was in the dark, and I was like, listen, I got 2 more weeks, and if I can't figure it out in 2 weeks, then I'm just going to take my life, because I can't find a path through. And a gentleman I worked for at the time, a guy named Mort Meyerson, gave me a book, which we can talk more about, and I read it, Man's Search for Meaning, and it caused me to start to reflect on 2 things. The first was that I wasn't a victim or a passenger in my life. I was an active participant, and my job was to find meaning, not wait for it to find me. And the second was, if I wanted to help myself, I should help somebody else. And with that sort of opening and that thought, I got asked by a friend of my brother's if I would meet with the guy on the Dallas Cowboys, which is my team, and his wife. I went and met with Derek and Emma. And Emma's brother had died in Afghanistan. He was a Marine. And they wanted to start a nonprofit, and they asked for my help. And I started helping them, and every 2 weeks someone would call me and say, I heard you help veterans groups. Can you help us? And I had no military experience. I had no understanding of that world. But the one thing I did understand was suffering and struggle and suicidality. And those are prominent in the community. And so I started helping them. And then, I just kept doing it and kept saying yes. And here I am, 13 years later, leading this organization of folks and getting to help people. And it's been, I wouldn't trade any of it, although some of it was incredibly, incredibly difficult and scary and challenging and hopeless at times.
A lot of things to dig out of that, man. Thank you so much for being so open and sharing that story. First off, books. You mentioned clearly you read books. You mentioned that book that changed your life. Were you reading books prior to that already?
I would read, but I would say to you that the idea of exploring notions around like meaning and the point of life and those kinds of things were not really on my radar or things I was reading. So I was reading, but I don't think I was reading anything that was catalyzing me to realize that, frankly, I was like dead inside.
Got it. So you weren't just reading the right things at the moment.
Yeah,
much.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think like if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. And one of the things that I did, and I took this Eat, Pray, Love trip around the world at some point to try to find myself, was I just asked everybody I knew, like, tell me your 3 favorite books. And so I just started to buy, and at the time I had a Kindle, and I just bought all these books, some of which I didn't like, some of which I did, but I ended up finding things that I never would have found any other way because my own limitations were my own limitations, my own preferences were my own preferences.
So a question that your ex-wife asked kind of led you down the path. Do you think that it was a question that was needed at that moment? As much as it was crazy and it took you down a path that you didn't expect, do you think is what was needed for you to get here?
Yeah, and I don't know if you know Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell studied the stories of mankind, and he talks about this idea that there is this moment when there's this call to adventure, and it's this idea that you realize that there's not enough of you in your life. And so I think that question that was asked by my then wife, now ex-wife, was a critical factor in that journey of basically it was a wake-up call. Be like, hey, and it wasn't asked in that intent, but who cares about the intent of the question? Mm-hmm. The way it was received was like, is this what I want to do with my one and only life as best we can tell? And I will always be grateful for that question because it was the wake-up call I needed to start to reflect and examine that led to everything else. But without that, like I'm still, asleep throughout my life.
So you were at the mountaintop. You hit rock bottom when you're sitting at the mountaintop again.
Yeah.
Really, sometimes people don't realize about you've talked about it, finding yourself, sometimes rebranding yourself. For you, it looked very in a different way. But rebranding looks completely different for so many different people on what that looks like. Changing the environment, like you truly just went cold turkey in a sense, right? And says, all right, well, what does it look like on the other side? And then from the other side, I realized, like, wait, this is not really the side that I wanted. How do I get back to, so it was crazy. And then you mentioned something, actually, that I wanted to also tap in was, in order to help me, I had to help somebody else. Where does that come from? And what does that look like?
And I'll come back and say one thing. Maybe I was at the top of a mountain before, but it wasn't the right mountain. Campbell says that the crisis in your life is when you get to the top of a ladder and it's against the wrong building. So I would say that, and David Brooks wrote a great book called The Second Mountain, is maybe I climbed the first mountain of accomplishment and like resume stuff, but certainly not like eulogy and meaningfulness. And so I think I'm on a very different place, and I'm not by myself, right? There's a lot of people that were hanging out at different spots on the mountain. The service stuff I think is really interesting. My mom's a teacher, my dad's a doctor. So I grew up around people who were engaged in helping people. But I think along the way, the allure of stuff probably took the place of a desire to do things for other people. And I don't think I was a bad person or a callous person, but I don't think I was meaningfully engaged in service in my life. And I think the recognition that if you live your life for yourself and for the sort of propagation and accumulation of yourself, you're going to end up empty and with a void inside. And I do recall that Mort's a big part of my story. This guy I worked for, and he had taken us to a food bank, and I remember we were just like sorting boxes with grits and some other things to give to folk, and I just remember feeling like a little bit better that day. And so this idea of doing things for other people is really what takes us outside of our own system and helps us realize so much about life and how much we have to be grateful for and all these kinds of things. And so, and I obviously work with communities that are dedicated to service, and ironically, they struggle with the inverse problem, which is the idea of taking care of themselves feels very selfish. And so you're trying to convince people, it's like, hey, at some point, if you don't fill your own cup, you got no water to give anybody else. And so it's just this interesting dynamic of who I find myself around now are people who understand and understood things that I didn't. And I'm not sure where I lost my way, but I did, and thankfully I found my way back to where I was supposed to be.
And it's the right people, man. People always ask, like, how do I get into the space that I'm in today, right? Helping others, because we all have a story. And I think I mentioned a little bit that, and pretty much people that kind of watched this show have probably heard the story plenty of times, so I won't say it. But I feel like it's, when people say, how do you get here? I say it's the right people. God blessed me with the right people. People that were seeing what I really was and the value of me before I even seen it in myself. And I commend my wife for, I think she was really a big part of that as well. But pouring into to others, man, it truly does fill your cup. And that's that passion and purpose work, right? When we talk about chasing passion and purpose, it's not the paychecks. When you really get to help others by sharing your story, Josh, by doing one simple thing, I could only imagine it, just by sharing your story, by being honest, by being yourself, more importantly. What other things do you feel allows you to be that leader for others? Like, how do you come now differently?
I think, and I believe deeply in order to sustainably help other people, right? I run a nonprofit. It's grown a lot. We have 85 people who work here, 86 people who work here. So it's a lot, but there's a lot of responsibilities, a lot of obligations, a lot of challenges we get to deal with. And so I think one of the things that's really, really important is to take care of yourself. And so, like, for me, it's having a routine. And what that's about for me is I wake up, I meditate every day, I engage in gratitude, I work out and move my body, and from that point forward, after maybe the first 2 hours of the day, then the rest of that day is for everybody else. But if I don't do those things, if I'm sleep deprived, if I'm not moving, if I'm not meditating, then I don't have the patience and the calm and the energy that's required to bring all my talents and skills to bear. So I think about it like it's like a flame, right? And part of what helps the flame certainly is helping other people, but you can certainly burn out. And John Lewis, the amazing civil rights activist, congressman, he said, be a pilot light, not a firecracker. And that, I think, is figuring out what you need to do in your life sustainably to be the pilot light. And I think practices do that, like gratitude, meditation. I think people do that, surrounding yourself with really good people who maybe when you aren't taking care of yourself are going to call you on it. Are really, really important. And then I think being able to engage in reflection and curiosity is, the one thing I would say. It's like I was struggling a little bit when you were saying the mountain, because I'm like, I still have so much more to learn. I still have so many more people to meet. I still have more things to do. And so this is deeply unfinished. And I think having that humility and that curiosity that is like an innate part of who I am is also really, really important, because otherwise you're like, oh, I figured everything out, I know everything, because the minute you think you got it, you're about to get punched in the face. I can promise you that. Yeah. And so I think staying hungry, staying curious is important.
Oh man, I love that. I love to stay curious and stay hungry. That is completely true. And it kind of goes back to this whole wrestling thing we were talking before. It's like I got to a level that I just one day imagined, and now I'm here. What's next? Like, there has to be more, right? Like, what happens if you continue to show up? And that's what happened for you. You continue to show up, and now you're president of this organization. What was the relationship with your parents? Like, did you have a close relationship with them growing up?
I did have a close relationship with them. My dad was working hard and trying to build his medical practice, and so I spent a lot of time with my mom. And my brother was a big influence in my life and just was always sort of like part of a parental figure, and very just inclusive in everything I did. And I think provided me with a lot of things that I didn't really appreciate until more recently, where I look back and I was like, holy cow, like he, when there was chaos, when there was stuff going down, he was always there. and I'm obviously deeply grateful to that, and I've shared that with him. But yeah, I mean, I think like relatively close to my family. I think, growing up in a Jewish family, there are certain expectations and ways that the culture operates that lead you down certain paths about, in particular, and this goes to what you said earlier about being yourself, is when you are trained that what other people think of you is more important than when you think of yourself, you're going to have a problem. You're going to make choices for the wrong reasons that are going to probably take you way, way, way off course. And that's what happened, right? I made these decisions, and it's like, I never really wanted to get married, but I got married. Never really wanted a job that was safe and comfortable, but I got a job that was safe and comfortable. Like, you do all these things, and then you start to get accustomed to certain ways of living and certain things, and you become socialized and institutionalized, and until and unless someone's like, hey, what the hell are you doing? Then you're like, what the hell am I doing? Like, I've always been like kind of an outsider, someone who thinks differently, but I'm in this place where that's not that, like, it's crazy. And so I think that's the interesting part of life. And I one time I was on a trip, and I was just randomly talking to this lady, and I was telling her my story. Somehow it came up, and she said, lots of people have existential crises in their life, and they get to the edge of jumping to the life that they're supposed to have, that they need to have, that they're meant to have, and they get scared and they go back to their old life. And I found that was really interesting, right? That like, it's our stories aren't unique, but maybe the follow through. And we shared, we talked about this in the pre-conversation about the role that your wife plays in like encouraging, because there's moments when it's not like, oh, you figure out what you're supposed to do with your life and everything is good. It's like, there are lots of moments where you're like, have I made a mistake? What am I doing? How am I going to provide for whatever I need to provide for? Like, you have all the, like, it doesn't mean you're on this like path of like, oh, everything is just great and the world, it conspires to help you. It's, you still have dark nights and challenges. And so how do you navigate those challenges, I think, is important, right? And the people you have in your lives to support you to say, no, like, you're going to keep doing this.
It's like, my life, Josh. Every day I'm telling myself, like, how did I get here? What's next? I love it. And I think being in those spaces, I think we've always there. And it kind of, to what you mentioned a little earlier, and what we've been kind of referring to, is the mindset. If your mindset is on par, when those questions do arise, you know how to pivot through those questions, because they come. It's imposter syndrome. It's never going to go away, right? I was actually listening. I don't know if you know who John Morgan is. You know who John Morgan is?
Mm-mm.
From Morgan and Morgan?
No.
So Morgan and Morgan is, just real quick, he was in Orlando. He's a big lawyer and now has a law office in every state in the country, right? And he talked about when he started, he just kind of talks about those early days of just never giving up. It's of people taking advantage of him, and how he had to pivot through never giving himself paychecks, investing all that money into something else, right? And then, and no matter how much money he had, he said he was still going through those moments of like, what the hell am I doing? Even though he's in all these states, he's still asking himself, 25 states in, what am I doing? Like, this doesn't even make sense. The dude's a billionaire, right? And all those times when you ask yourself those questions, it's like you got to see the other side. I'm pretty sure you've seen the picture where the guys are going for the diamond. The guy's right there and he turns around. Have you seen that one?
Mm-mm.
Josh, are you on social media, Josh?
Not really. Not really.
No, but it's those moments, man, that we're so close. I actually wanted to ask you before we pivot into the nonprofit, how long were you on that detour from one mountain to the other?
That question was really in 2011. I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of different people to realize that, I was way off kilter. And then it's probably a couple years later that I had been helping people and started to feel a little bit better. And then I got told by one of the veterans who was involved in a group that I was helping out with that I was only allowed to help his brother and sister if I, can I curse if I'm quoting somebody?
Yeah.
All right. He told me to unfuck myself. And I smiled and I laughed and I was like, fair enough. Because this is the point of, I was serving other people. I felt better, but I still wasn't okay. And so I was like, all right, how do I do that? And then basically part of my debt that I owe veterans is they helped me unfuck myself to get to a place where I found my own sense of courage, my own sense of strength, my own sense of clarity and calm and focus and direction. And so that experience was in like October of 2013. I met Ken Falk, who started Boulder Crest in November of 2013, and then joined him here in May of 2014. So, it was probably 2 to 3 year period.
Wow.
And Mort, who I've mentioned multiple times, was, I went to him when I was working for him, and I was really struggling, and I needed to go away on this trip. And I said, Mort, like, I'm not okay, and I need to go away. And he said, you're right. He said, you're really depressed right now. But you're going to figure this out. It's going to take you between 3 months and 3 years, but you're going to figure this out. I don't know why. I have no idea where the numbers came from. I don't know. Like, I don't understand it.
Wow.
But he was about right of the latter side of that it was about 3 years of, like, in the wilderness, of wandering, of trying to figure stuff out, of not having any money, of sleeping on couches, but staying true to, I had found this thing that was my purpose and was my meaning. Yeah. And like I said, this is where we share in common, is like, that's great. You still have to figure out how to convert that into something that's, like, productive and meaningful and useful. Otherwise, you're just passionate about something, but you're not able to bring that passion into the world in a way that, is contagious in different ways. So,
Yeah. Wow. That is so cool, man. And out of that time frame, what is it that you take out of that moment? Because while you're living in it, it's very dark times. You're in your head. Things are not going well. But after you get out of it, you look back and, like, holy shit, I learned a lot from this moment. What do you take from those moments that you still use today while running the organization?
I think one of the challenges of the world we live in is we've gotten to this place where we have a diagnosis for everything, and we, like, pathologize life in so many ways. And we work with primarily first responders, military and veteran, where the term PTSD is often used, cited, where people think most, soldiers have this. And often for people, when they get a label like that, it's like, oh no, like, I broke it. My life is over, and the rest of it's going to be a fraction of what it used to be. And I think the part I take the most out of is two things. A, how things are is not how they have to be, but you got to do some work to make that conversion possible. And the other thing is, like, it is when it's darkest that maybe I'll just quote, sorry, I didn't do that on purpose, but with Churchill, it's like when you're going through hell. Churchill said, when you're going through hell, keep going, right?
Yeah.
It's like when you're in the dark, keep going. And because what feels like you're not making progress, in a good way, right? But, like, that there is light out there. And maybe the last thing is be honest. Like, when you're struggling, and I understand the shame and all of it, I've been through all of it, but it's like saying, like, holy cow, like, I'm scared, I'm not okay, I don't know what's happening, was the beginning of all the stuff changing. And I think being willing to acknowledge that out loud to another human being was very powerful, as shame producing as it was to have to acknowledge that my life was unmanageable and I was overwhelmed. And I think being true and being honest is the other piece.
If the Hart and Hustle podcast has ever sparked any idea or made you think differently, do us a favor. Make sure to guys share this, post it on LinkedIn, or even text that nonprofit friend that you just have. Whatever works, this is what keeps the conversation going and allows us to just grow this community together. Seriously, we appreciate you. I think, man, was it shame? Was it ego? Was it pride?
I think it's all of those things. It was all of those things,
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think it was all of those things. There was a particular moment when I pulled into this parking garage at this place, and it just hit me. It's like, holy cow, like, I'm not okay. And I was scared, like scared. I was scared that it felt like my system had hijacked me. And I remember I called my best friend just reflexively, and he was like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm not good, dude. Like, I'm really, really bad. And then he said, you should probably talk to somebody. And I said, listen here, you MFer. I am talking to you. I'm like, so shut the hell up and listen to me, because there's nobody else in the world that I would tell this to right now. And and I think it was all of those things, but I needed somebody in my life that none of that really mattered. The only thing that mattered is like it was like me being like, I'm drowning, like, I'm like, help me. And I think that was a big step.
Oh, man.
Hell
yeah. Kudos to you, man. Kudos to you and where you've gotten yourself. It's definitely not easy work, and hopefully those that are watching really take how I always say it looks great. The seat feels great, looks great when someone's looking for it, but they don't understand the story. And this is just one of the many stories of someone that's sitting in a president CEO chair, that nothing was handed. Everything was truly just sacrifice and grit and never giving up. And to this day, still probably just dealing with your own things, right? Life or work related. What does a day to day look like for you, though, as president CEO of this organization?
Day to day, you know, I I'd say like it's a, I have a lot of energy, like a lot of energy, and I travel a lot, probably 50-60% of the time. People are like, how do you do this? I'm like, I just have a lot of energy. It's probably best to spend it this way. And so I spend a lot of time having conversations with people in the outside world to talk about how we can work together, how we can help their folks, how we can partner with them, basically the same amount of time supporting, mentoring, and coaching the people who work with us as we've grown as an organization. And so I would say a lot of conversations, a lot of talking that gets done, and then I think the other piece is getting to spend time thinking through a little bit more longer term, which is honestly like more what I would do on the weekends and in the evenings. Is like, okay, everything's quiet, the emails aren't coming in, just starting to reflect on like, okay, like here's things that are coming down the track. How do we want to approach this? How do we want to tackle this? Is what I would say. And then just keeping people calm, right? I mean, I think one of the challenges in life is that, human beings are challenging and human beings challenge us, and there's some good in that, and there's some challenge in that. And I think just helping people talk through like, okay, what happened? What are we going to do? How do we want to handle it? And I think, there's an aspect of it where you're, as a CEO, you're a leader, you have to have vision, but you're also a coach. And so people can come to you and whether it's personal or professional stuff, and you just work through it and, figure it out and keep moving. And then I think part of the job too is to inspire people, right? Is to go out and talk and help people realize like we're in the business of shifting an entire paradigm. And so you really have to paint this picture to help people realize like there's another way to think about this stuff. There's another way to operate when it comes to life and struggle. And so, getting to have a lot of conversations with people, whether they're struggling, whether they're running an agency or whatever it might be.
I love it, man. How many individuals were you guys able to serve this past year?
Last year was like 43,000 people, which is crazy. When we started in 2013, we wanted to serve 700 people a year. And so it just gives you this sense that there's this contagion for another way to operate and think about life. And so, and I suspect, I tell people, I'm like, we're still just getting started. Like it's still early days. There's a lot of need in the world. And if you're running a nonprofit that's focused on mental health, then you're in a growth industry. I wish that wasn't true, but it is true. And there's a lot of people that need help, and in the worlds we live in, but also just in the world. Like you don't have to look very far to look at the stats. It's maybe the richest country in the history of the world, but we sure as hell don't know how to live in the world. And and that's, and there's just too many people living, less than good lives, and I can't abide that. And so, part of what I have to think about is like, how do you help people outside of our core constituencies without losing focus on what is most important to this organization? And I think that's part of the fun of like, you have to get creative about how do you solve problems and not just keep growing and growing and growing, because we're not a business. We're not going to sell to somebody. We just have to raise more money, and that's not an easy thing to do. So you want to grow responsibly, and you want to leverage, you want to scale your impact without scaling your organization.
You're talking about raising money, man. We're in a time, and I know you either may feel it, not feel it. We're going to find this out, but where organizations are concerned, right? Government funding is being cut all over the place. Are you guys an organization that looks towards that government funding, or have you guys been doing more philanthropy, looking at the philanthropic work and getting funds that way?
Most of our most of our money comes from individuals, foundations, corporations, and things along those lines. A small percentage of our money comes from the government. And so, and while in some respects I'm hopeful that'll grow, through all the Doge work and all the rest of it, there wasn't much of an effect, but it's probably like 3 to 5% of our raise. But I'm well aware, and I have plenty of friends who were very, very dependent on those funds and got cut, and it really creates a massive issue, right? Because they're having to lay people off. They're not able to provide services to people who are obviously in need of services. And so, you wonder about at some point things stabilize a little bit more and kind of come back to a status, a stasis of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think has been some of the challenges? I mean, you obviously grown from hundreds to now tens of thousands of people you serve. Is there still a challenge on how to grow? Like, is it a communication? Is it people? I always feel like people just don't know, right? Like, how do we tell people that this exists in their own backyard? What are some of the challenges you've experienced as you continue to serve more people?
One of the things that's been interesting and is meaningful is we haven't had to do a lot of promotion for our programs. Is that in essence you get to this flywheel where when you serve people and you do a good job, that these communities are at the end of the day relatively small. So if you have 10 veterans going through your program and 8 of them had an amazing experience, they're going to tell 2 or 3 of their friends each, and so it starts to beget more and more applicants. So that's where you have to figure out how do you grow, because without doing anything, without paying any money for advertising or telling people about what you're doing, you're going to continue to have more people who need your services. And similarly, I think when you do really good work, people tell other people about the work you're doing. And so on the kind of the interest in what we're doing, that's where the challenge comes, which is how do you continue to grow to meet needs without having to continue to accumulate a larger and larger number that you have to hit every single year to pay everybody and to do all the things we need to do to run our programs. And so finding the balance of those things is important, and just growing intelligently is a big part of this, right? And that's why when I say, about reading fiction books is like, I read plenty of books on strategy. There's a great book, Blitzscaling by Reid Hoffman, that talks about like, if you look at Silicon Valley companies and you look at the way they think about growth and how they're trying to do stuff, there are a lot of parallels to what we're trying to accomplish. And so, how do you scale impact without scaling cost is not an abnormal conversation for any business. And so I draw upon a lot of inspiration in those areas. And then the other piece is, as you grow, we were 35 people 3 years ago, we're 86 people today. It puts pressure on the culture you want to create, because now you have people who I haven't met, who maybe are working who are remote, right? And they're doing mobile programming. And so they don't have the same level of contact. And it is really, really important to me, the culture of our organization, how we do things, how we treat each other. And so it really forces you to be really thoughtful about how do you maintain the culture of an organization and the standard of an organization when I may not have met met the new people who are joining it. And that's part of why I travel, right? To get the opportunity to spend time with people so that they understand from the top what it is that's expected and how we want to operate and how we want to run things. And I think it's an important part of running an organization. Is it's the saying, right? Like, what does it profit a man to gain the world if he loses his soul? Is there are plenty of companies that are growth at all costs, and then you meet the people who work at those companies and they hate their lives. And I don't want that, right? That's not my idea of a good time. I don't want to lead that organization. I don't want to be part of it. And so that, I think, is a constant challenge of making sure you have the right people, you're supporting those people, and then how those people are engaging with other people internally and externally is important.
Your background was for-profit, right? Before you got into nonprofit?
It was.
What do you enjoy about the nonprofit that maybe for-profit wasn't giving you?
I'd say 2 things. So everything that I learned at the companies I worked for is incredibly valuable to me today. And I think that's, I can't guarantee it, but I would argue to people who go through these massive pivots in their life it's although someone might look and be like, well, your resume was like this, and then you went like way over here. It's like, yeah, but I was learning, right? I was learning, and all the things I learned I needed to be able to do this thing over here is a big piece of it. But fundamentally, I think there's a lot of things about working in a nonprofit that make life amazing. Is you're generally going to be surrounded by people who are mission focused, right? Is the people who work here obviously aren't here because they're trying to make a bunch of money. They're here because they want to help people. And so you just have this really high caliber of amazing human beings who I love, who I admire, who are just like amazing. And the other thing is, like, you get to, like, you exist to help people and solve a problem, right? Like, that's the purpose of everything we do is, how do we help people live a good life? How do we help people not take their lives? So when I show up and I get to be like, how can we help you? I mean it. Like, I'm not trying to sell a product or service. I'm trying to figure out how do we address the challenges that they have. And I just have to make sure we do that in a responsible fashion so that we have the money to be able to do the things we need to do. But that's like the best part of it is your motive is pure. And the last piece is the people who volunteer, who invest in us, are amazing, right? So like, I'm constantly exposed to people who are generous enough to give of their time and their treasure to get to help be part of our world, and you just meet like amazing people. And so I think that to me is like, this is definitely where I'll spend my life, and it's amazing, and I'm deeply grateful for all of it, right?
Yeah. And the nonprofit, I always enjoy that. Every day is a different day. Today you be CEO, and then maybe tomorrow you're playing a different role, and that's just kind of the life in the nonprofit world. What is a uh, if I'm someone receiving service, am I calling in? Am I texting in? Like, how easy and what does that navigation look like if I'm trying to get some service from Boulder Crest?
So, our nonprofit is the home of post-traumatic growth. And so we develop and deliver and we study and scale post-traumatic growth-based programs. And if people haven't heard of post-traumatic growth, that doesn't make them unique. But I highly encourage you to check out our website, bouldercrest.org, to learn more about this idea that in struggle, there is value, right? Which is at the core of my story. I found it my own way. And so we do a few different programs. Boulder Crest has 3 retreat centers, 3 campuses, one in Virginia, one in Arizona, one in Texas. And then at the end of last year, an amazing Navy veteran donated 207-acre campus in Wyoming to us. So we'll have a 4th place. And so you have these places, and we host families, so combat veterans and their families for 2 to 7 nights. They come onto the website. We put the dates up every 4 months in advance, and they can sign up. They can come once every 2 years to one of our places and enjoy getting to spend time together, and it doesn't cost them anything. Other folks who are struggling will hear about our program, Warrior Path, some way or another. They'll go onto the website, they'll fill out an application, and within 72 hours, we'll reach out and say, hey, let's set up a conversation to see if this is the right fit for you. And that'll be one of our peers, one of our veterans or first responders will have a conversation. And then we do work in the world, which we call Struggle Well, where we go to agencies, military units, first responder agencies, and we run training. So sometimes people who show up in those classes get assigned to go to those classes, and that's always fun because it's like, hey, you're going to Struggle Well class. And sometimes people are like, oh, I thought they were telling me I was screwed up. And so that happens. Sometimes people sign up for the classes, and then they get the opportunity to kind of learn about post-traumatic growth, to be part of something. So that's the general way people are finding out about us, and it's a lot of word of mouth in terms of how people hear about us, how leaders hear about us. Someone will say, hey, I saw this thing, I heard this thing, and then I'd love to work with you guys and and then put it together.
Hell yeah, man. You mentioned culture a little earlier. What are those values that create that culture? I think that it's so important. I worked for an airline industry. I always enjoyed. That's the first time actually that I've seen a company really live off their values and even mention values, right? And I think that was so big on how we've seen the culture and how I've experienced the culture. To this day, I still loved it. I still loved everything they understood for. I still understand all 5 values, can repeat it. What does it look like for your organization at Boulder Crest? I mean, clearly you want positivity. I can imagine it's one of those values, but there has to be some more.
What we have as our values are called PKC3. So the P is passionate. This is not a job, right? This is a calling. Yep. You are surrounded by people who are deeply hair on fire passionate about helping. And so I need people who are really, really committed to wanting to be part of our world and wanting to help other people. And no matter what your role is, there has to be some individual connection to what we do. The K is kind. And there's 2 pieces of kind. Kind is kind. Don't be an asshole, as the book, there's a famous book, right? The no asshole rule is don't be an asshole. There's just no cause for it. Handle your stuff. If you're frustrated by somebody, have a conversation with somebody. Don't yell, don't scream, don't be a jerk. And the other piece of being kind is it's a lot kinder to talk with somebody than it is to talk about somebody. And so being direct is also a piece of that. And then the 3 C's are competence, right? I want people who are dedicated to being the best at what they do as they can possibly be. Curiosity, which I think is the key to life. We talked about that earlier. Is just being curious about things. And then the last is courage. We are an organization that is entrepreneurial in a lot of respects, and so we take chances. And people don't get punished for mistakes. We don't yell at people, make them feel bad. I've worked at places where you make a mistake, you're going to hear about it from 30 people, and you're going to get beat down. And so those are our values. And when I think about people who come into our world, those are important. When I think about people who are in our world, and when I think about when somebody, we'll hear from people hey, I met a Boulder Crest person and they were so Boulder Cresty, that there's a tangible feeling of what it means. Yep. And generally what they're talking about is somebody who is service oriented and is deeply proud and passionate about getting to be part of this. And so, that's what I want for our culture. And those values are important. And like you said, I've worked at places where there are values, but they're like those motivational posters on the wall. They're not meaningful. And I think that it's really, really important that you're not hypocritical. And so for me, when you have people who are service oriented, and the nature of our communities is they will serve over and over. They'll say yes to everything. And so we have to make sure that we don't have an organization dedicated to helping other people be well, but that's impacting negatively the wellness of the people who work for us. And so those are the things we have to make sure that we do so that we're congruent in that what we're offering the world, we're also making sure is happening in our world. And those are just the things you think about and we're all different as it relates to that, right? Like how much we can work, all those how much we can travel, all those things are different depending on people's family situations and energy levels, et cetera. But those are the things I think about, and I have an amazing mentor, Ken Falk, who started our organization. I live next door to Ken, and he's just an amazing human being. And I think this is a piece, and you mentioned having good people in your lives, is nobody knows everything about everything. And humility to acknowledge that, like, you don't know certain things about stuff is not something that you should be ashamed about. It's something you should be like, hey, I don't know anything about this. Now, obviously, we live in a world with podcasts and AI and YouTube. You can learn most things. But I have people in my life who I can be like, hey, I've never dealt with this. Can you help me think through this? And I think that's a big piece of nobody does anything on their own. And so having people that you can do stuff with is really important.
Love it, Josh. I love that you've experienced life in the way that you have. Some people don't get to experience life this way, right? Some people would have got stuck on that detour somewhere. Obviously, you found your way back to a better version of yourself. Not saying the old version wasn't good. I think we have to evolve. You evolved. I go back to that younger version of myself when I was in my 20s, and I look back and I'm like, man, I was a savage. But I had to be as well. I enjoyed life as well. And I look at who I am now, and I'm kind of grateful and thankful. You mentioned grateful earlier. What are the things that you're grateful for, man, being in the seat that you're at today? Not just so much as from the leader perspective, but the human perspective of you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm grateful for life, right? I'm grateful for, maybe not the right term, but like a second chance at figuring out what to do with mine. I'm grateful for, what I consider the greatest wealth in life is to have amazing people in your lives, that I have far more people in my lives that I deeply love and cherish than I have time to spend time with them. And that when I do get to see them, it's like no time has ever passed. And I'm grateful for getting to live a life that is meaningful and purposeful, where I wake up and I'm filled with gratitude and excitement about getting to do really meaningful things. But most of all, I think it's the people in my life is that I'm most grateful for. But there was a time in my life in Thanksgiving of 12 when I passed, when I was asked what I was grateful for. And to wake up now every day and just be like overflowing with like, I can't believe I get another day. I can't believe I get to do this. Mm-hmm. That is the greatest blessing in life. And,
amen to that.
It's something I cherish. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to have meaningful conversations and appreciate your story and your journey and everything you've done, man. It's really amazing. There's a lot of us in the world, right?
You too, man. Yeah, there is, and that's why we got to share the stories more. I believe one story, one person changes somebody's life. Yeah. And when we talk about stories, I don't read books. That don't get confused with the books I have back here. Okay, people gift me books,
decoration,
and I'll skim through them. I'll try, but my brain starts to think about 10 different ideas and businesses that I just can't really get to read them. But clearly, you read books, fiction, nonfiction, motivational. What are your 3 books that you can give someone that may be in a space of pivoting in their life?
Yeah. So Man's Search for Meaning to me is the best book ever written. There's religious people, so I'll call it the second best book. Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor. By the way, side note, I get accused of having dark reading taste, so just bear with me. The second is The Choice by Edith Eger, also a Holocaust and Auschwitz survivor. But an amazing, amazing journey and a story, especially when you talk about pivots, of people who made these pivots. And I think the third, if we're talking about pivots, I think would be The Second Mountain by David Brooks. David Brooks has written a lot of great books, but that book really talks about, I think, the things that we are prioritizing and focusing on in our life, and uses incredible examples of folks. So we'll start with those 3, and I'll give you a bonus. So Siddhartha is an amazing book by Hermann Hesse, and it's an incredible book because I feel like it's a lot about my story of this. It's the fictionalized story of Buddha, but it's like him being protected, not seeing anything bad in the world, and then getting exposed to it and being like, oh my God, like there's so much more to life, and then going out into the world. And I feel a lot of echoes in that book to my own life. And so I think those are great books for people in transitional component parts of their life to help realize that the struggle is real, it's beautiful and meaningful and a core part of the journey, but so is the other side of that story.
Love it, man. I appreciate you, Josh. It's been an amazing time, amazing conversation. Where can people find more information about what you guys are doing at Boulder Crest?
Yeah. So we're on the socials, Boulder Crest Foundation, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook. And then our website, bouldercrest.org, is really, I think, like a hub for all things post-traumatic growth in the world. And although we serve military, veterans, first responders, nothing about what we do is unique to those communities. Most people in the world, to include the two of us, have been through traumatic stuff in our lives. We've been through difficulty and struggle in our lives. And figuring out how do we make sense of that to live a good life is important. So check out the website at bouldercrest.org. I think you'll find an amazing array of content and things that will land, even if you're as far away from these communities as possible.
Josh, I appreciate you. If you guys are still watching, make sure you guys do like, subscribe, and comment. Another great conversation with leaders like Josh. I'm sitting here, man. We could definitely have done this for another hour, but I know you got things to do. I'm afraid. This is Josh. We'll catch you on the next one. Latest.